I don't know about you, but one of the things that I have secretly quite enjoyed during the lockdown period is the opportunity to get a glimpse into different people's homes as they've done their socially distanced interviews or worked online or been filming TV programmes in a socially distanced way. And it's been really quite fascinating to see, obviously, all the bookcases, very impressive, but to just get a little glimpse inside of somebody else's home, particularly maybe well known figures or celebrities that we've seen on TV a lot. And but the frustration, of course, is that you see the sort of head and shoulders shot of the person, and you only really get a tiny little glimpse of the room around them. And I'm quite often left wondering what the rest of the room looks like. You might recognise that I'm in my usual spot for filming here, which is more by necessity than design, because it's the least used room in the house and therefore usually the quietest, depending on what time of day it is. And you might have had your own thoughts and ideas about what the rest of this room looks like. It's our kind of natural curiosity, isn't it, to fill in the blanks, if you like. You might be quite surprised to see that the rest of the room actually looks like this. I wonder if you would expect to see all the makeshift gym equipment down here to help us stay fit during lockdown. The toys, the bits and pieces, the Lego, the smelly trainers, the random assortment of items that we've kind of just accumulated and just kind of shoved down here because we didn't know where to put them. All the bits and pieces that my husband and I have brought home to enable us to do our jobs where we are. It's a bit of a mess, really, isn't it? But this is the reality, isn't it? We see a tiny little bit of people and we make up our own minds. And we have such a temptation, don't we, when we don't have the full picture, to start adding in our own ideas and our own thoughts and making our own assumptions about a situation. And that's one of the traps that we fall into when we are operating in the unknown. And God's been speaking to me a little bit about operating in the unknown and dealing with uncertainty in the last few weeks. And so I just wanted to share a few thoughts. Some of us are better at dealing with uncertainty than others, and that's perfectly natural. But we all have a tendency to fall into the same possible traps. So firstly, just making up our own minds, filling in the gaps for ourselves, making our own assumptions. Then sometimes we are just tempted to look at a situation where we don't know all the facts and just disengage because we don't know everything. We feel uncertain, we feel unsure, and actually it's just easier to step away. And then finally, sometimes we find ourselves in situations and we're not in possession of the full facts. We don't know the bigger picture. But, we just go ahead and steam in anyway and think and do what we think will be best. But of course, when we fall into some of those traps, the worst thing we can do is actually leave God out of the equation. And when we're walking with God, so often we're called into situations where we're asked to minister into a particular situation or to a particular person. And we don't always know the full facts. Sometimes we're left wondering, well, God, I really feel like you've called me here, but I'm not sure why. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation in our own lives and we're just left wondering, why? Why is this happening? What's going on? Where are you in this, Lord? And again, in our own situations, we fall into those same traps. I'm not going to engage with this because I'd rather ignore it because I don't understand what's happening. Or I'm just going to steam ahead and do what I think is best. Or actually, I'm just going to decide that I think I know what is happening here, without calling and waiting on God to see what it is that He's doing in this situation. So on my journey, I've had to learn to step back temporarily and to make a definite decision to draw God into the situation and ask him to walk with me through the uncertainty. And the first thing that I've learned to do is to try and figure out what I do know. And one of the things that is a great comfort to me is knowing, as Romans 8:28 says, that God works for the good of those who love him. And importantly, and this is the part of the verse that often gets left off when we want to give this verse to people as an encouragement, it doesn't just say God works for the good of those who love him. It says, and who have been called according to his purpose. When we make a decision to follow Jesus, we become part of God's good plans. We may not always know what they are. We may not always know what our part is or should be, but we can be absolutely certain, as the verse says, that God is working for the good in those situations, and that when we are aligned with his purposes, that we can be working alongside him for the good as well. Another thing that I found really helpful is just to stop and take some time and just to ask God what he's doing. Sometimes it's just as simple as sitting down and saying, Lord, what is your will in this situation? Or Lord, will you reveal more of yourself to me so that I can understand how you are working here? A few years ago, I was in a really difficult situation and quite a difficult point in my life, and I was under a lot of stress. And I found myself just continually praying to God, why is this happening? How am I going to get out of it? Why can't I work through this? And it was an incredibly frustrating time. And then one day it just hit me out of the blue that I had been praying the wrong prayer. And so one day I just sat down and I was genuinely kind of near the end of my tether. And I just sat down with open hands physically on the floor and just said, Lord, what is your will here? And it was like a curtain dropped. And it was quite incredible to just have opened up before me more of God and more of his will in that situation, simply because I had just changed what I had been asking God. So sometimes it can be really helpful to pray, Lord, what's your will in this situation? Or show me more of you. And sometimes when we feel that we've been called into a situation where we might be asked to minister in that situation or to a particular person, and we're feeling really uncertain because we don't know the full facts, it can be really helpful just to ask God what he wants us to know about that situation. Lord, is there anything else that you want to tell me about this before I move in? And just wait on the Lord and see how he speaks to us. Really simple things, but so often we just forget that, don't we? I know that I have. And I think another thing that has just struck me, again, very recently about operating in uncertainty is that God knows that we don't know everything. We are not meant to know everything. And as Marcus reminded us in last week's encouragements, that our journey to know God more and more is a lifelong journey. And actually, as Christians, we are living in the now and the not yet of God's kingdom. And there are things that we don't know now that will be revealed to us when we meet Christ in glory. And that we have to come to terms with that. And so we position ourselves before God in humility, accepting that we don't know everything, but being sure that he does, and being certain that we can trust him and his plans. 1 Corinthians 13 is a chapter that is really well known for the way it speaks into love. But I've always been a little bit fascinated with this particular passage. These are verses 9 to 13, and it says, "Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." I've often wondered in that passage, as I said, that speaks a lot about love, why that little section there about what we know and what we don't know. And as I was reflecting on that recently, I just wondered if the reason why that is there amongst the talk about love is to show us a response in times of uncertainty and when facing the unknown. Sometimes questions like this can be quite difficult, but I ask myself, when I'm uncertain, is my response love? When I'm stepping into the unknown, is my response love? When we're called to minister in situations and to different people, when we don't know the full facts about them, when we don't know everything about the situation, our response often can be fear, it can be mistrust, it can be suspicion. How often is our response love? And so the things that I have been praying through with the Lord are to help me to ask the right questions of Him when I'm not sure of a situation, to help me to know more of Him, and to help me to make my response love. I know that we are all walking through our own uncertainties at the moment and dealing with our own unknowns. Let me leave you with the words of Psalm 121. "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore."